We want to welcome you here this morning. And as we gather, it's strange to say, as we gather here online, we just want to welcome you to our Sunday morning service. And I want to just remind everyone that, worship goes on 24/7. And this is a great place for us to gather to worship, but honestly, it's just a building that the church gathers in. And so, as I look out, it's a little sad, but I'm excited. I wish you could see what I see standing here, because we truly do miss each and every one of you. And as we prepare for Gabe's message this morning, I thought maybe it'd be nice just to look at the heart and to think of the sentiments that the Apostle Paul spoke as he wrote to the church there in Thessalonians. And he said there to the church of Thessalonica, he said, we always thank God for you, excuse me, mentioning you in our prayers. And I just love this. He says, and we continually remember before our God and Father your work produced by faith, your labor prompted by love, and your endurance inspired by hope in our Lord Jesus Christ. I hope that truly does inspire each and every one of us. That needs to be our prayer, but more importantly, that needs to be how we live our lives.
Could you use some good news today? I could. And I have some good news to share with you. I only wish I could share it with you in person. But to help slow the spread of COVID-19, our church family here at Farragut has made the same decision so many congregations have made this weekend, and that is to not meet in person, at least not for a few weeks anyway, until this virus has run its course. Yes, there's a lot of common sense to that decision. The State Department, our governor, even the CDC has admonished us to not meet as a large group. And yet, as logical as the decision seems, it was still a hard one to make. Because we are a church family. We are the body of Christ. We're part of one another. And a great deal of the encouragement that we find in these faith walks of ours arises from coming together as a family. But precisely because we're a family that loves one another and wants to look out for one another, today we're making the decision to love and look out for each other by keeping some physical distance. And yet, by also connecting as much as possible through phone and video. And if you'd stick around until the end of today's message, you'll get a little bit of insight into how I'm personally dealing with not being able to physically gather with you. We were made for community. A God of perfect relationship, Father, Son, and Spirit, all united and agreed in what's right. That God of relationship made you and me for relationship. And to varying degrees, this is an inherent need in every human being, whether you're a believer in Jesus or not. We are made for one another. And right now, all over the world, people are having to get creative in how they fill this God-given need. You've probably seen the videos of Italians coming to their windows, confined to their apartments, but making music and singing with one another from across their streets. All across Europe, in Spain and in Croatia, citizens are gathering on their balconies at certain times of day to applaud the medical workers who are still out there and taking care of the sick and seeking a cure. And closer to home, in Franklin, Tennessee, an elementary school art teacher named Cassie Stevens is live streaming art lessons every day until this virus passes. This past week, 30,000 people logged on for her live streamed art lessons. And they're not just watching, but many of them are responding with pictures and videos of their own, showing off the art they created based on her instruction. We were made by God to thrive, to be at our very best when in community and interacting with one another. Even us introverts were made that way. And our predecessors in the faith, the Israelites, knew this especially. They especially knew that we need each other in times of stress and uncertainty. This is what they sang in Psalm 133. How beautiful and pleasant it is when brothers live together in harmony. They knew that's how our loving God made us to live. Psalm 133 is one of 15 Psalms of Ascent that we have arranged very purposefully back to back in our Hebrew scriptures. And we've been looking at these Psalms of Ascent for the last few Sundays. They were the songs that the Israelites sang as they each year pilgrimaged from their homes all across the world up to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. But they didn't have to wait until they reached Jerusalem to enjoy the blessing of community. They made this pilgrimage as a group, in families and in groups of families. And as these family groups pilgrimaged to Jerusalem, they sang to encourage one another to keep going through all the challenges of this often physically dangerous and time-consuming journey. They sang Psalms 120 through 134. And last week we looked very quickly at Psalm 126, a song, in the words of Eugene Peterson, that was sung by people between a good time remembered and a good time hoped for. Let's hear Psalm 126 again, this time from the Complete Jewish Bible, translated by David Stein. When Adonai restored Zion's fortunes, we thought we were dreaming. Our mouths were full of laughter, and our tongues shouted for joy. Among the nations it was said, Adonai has done great things for them. Adonai did do great things for us, and we are overjoyed. Return our people from exile, Adonai, as streams fill the Negev. Those who sow in tears will reap with cries of joy. He who goes out weeping as he carries his sack of seed will come home with cries of joy as he carries his sheaves of grain. Return our people from exile as streams fill the Negev. The Negev was the desert land south of Israel. It would have been a common path for exiled Israelites to traverse on their pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And as they passed through the Negev, these Israelites imagined what it would be like one day when God flooded the desert with his people as they made their way from distant lands back home to Jerusalem, where they would live with God permanently, forever. But the Negev wasn't normally a place full of streams. For most of the year, the Negev was a barren wasteland of sand and hard sun-baked dirt. But when it rained hard. And the after effect of all that rain would be rivers running through this desert and acres of beautiful flowers exploding into life. The seed of life that lay beneath that arid topsoil of the Negev would break through and flood the desert with beautiful color. That's how the Israelites imagined God would act one day. The people trusted that one day God would free his people from exile, and he would gather them home to live with him forever, not just to visit for Passover, but to stay forever in Jerusalem with him. They believed that God would do this because he promised he would. Through the prophet Isaiah, God said, "The ransomed of the Lord will return and come with joyful shouting to Zion. With everlasting joy upon their heads, they will find gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing will flee away." Isaiah 35, verse 10. The Israelites imagined that when God did this, their freedom would come as suddenly and as unexpectedly as those rains exploding over the dry, arid Negev desert, filling the desert with new life. And until God fulfilled that promise, until God finally freed his people and brought them home to be with him forever, traveling the desert would be difficult. The Israelites compared their life's pilgrimage to the hard work of sowing seed, trusting in faith that one day this seed they sowed would become a harvest, and the work of carrying on day to day until that harvest ripened. The work of carrying on through times of dryness and fruitlessness, through times of frustration and loneliness. That work was work. It was toil. But again, to quote Eugene Peterson, all suffering, all pain, all emptiness, and all disappointment is seed. Sow it to God, and He will finally bring a crop of joy from it. It's not that we believers in Jesus have a blind and baseless optimism that everything will eventually just work out all right. No, our confidence is in a God who has promised to make good out of what we can't. The very next psalm the Israelites sang on their way to Jerusalem addresses this. Psalm 127 was written by none other than King Solomon, based on his own personal experience. And it begins this way: unless the Lord builds the house, its builders build in vain. Unless the Lord protects a city, guarding it with sentries will do no good. It is useless for you to work so hard from early morning until late at night, for God gives rest to His loved ones. Any attempt at building a personal dynasty without regard to God, any attempt at raising a family without a primary concern for their spiritual welfare first and above all, any attempt to do good for humanity and to leave this world a little better place than it was when you got here, apart from the goal of glorifying God and advancing His kingdom while you're here on earth, apart from that, all of our efforts are as useless and meaningless as building the Tower of Babel. It will all eventually come to nothing. The city of Edinburgh, Scotland, has an official coat of arms. It depicts a long-haired woman standing with a deer, and above them is written the Latin phrase, Nisi Dominus Frustra. Without God, frustration. Nisi Dominus Frustra. I think we would all do well to live by the motto of Edinburgh, Scotland. Like I said, King Solomon had to learn this from his personal experience. Having achieved wealth and comfort and a legacy and filled his body with all the pleasure that a human body can hold, King Solomon was left to write this in Ecclesiastes chapter 2. I looked at everything I had worked so hard to accomplish, and it was all so meaningless, like chasing the wind. Now, that's a pretty sad conclusion to come to at the end of one's life. And I would think that if there's anything sadder than building an empire of earthly successes and then realizing you had left God out of all of it and it amounted to nothing, if there was anything sadder than that, it might be surviving a hard time, as so many across the world are going through right now. And on the other side of that hard time, having nothing to show for it. Coming through that time of difficulty, no stronger, no wiser, no more compassionate or empathetic, no more trusting in God than you were before. That truly would be the definition of fruitless labor. Our tears must be sown in God. Our hardship must be trusted to God if we hope to return from the harvest with our arms full of blessing and shouts of rejoicing. Now, it's not that we humans on our own can't do good and make good out of bad situations. You and I are capable of making good out of bad. And right now, there are so many good news stories coming out of this pandemic. One of my favorite was in an article this past week. You may have read it. A hospital in northern Italy ran out of valves that were absolutely necessary for helping patients who were suffering respiratory diseases as a result of COVID-19. The hospital called their supplier asking for more of these valves, and the supplier told them, "We can't get them to you. We cannot make enough of these valves and get them to you in time to save the patients in question." That's when two enterprising young men with a 3D printer snapped into action. They got their hands on just one valve. They reverse engineered it, designed one of their own, and started cranking them out on their 3D printer for $1 a piece. Now, this valve's manufacturer typically charges $11,000 for one valve, but last I read, they had no intention of suing these enterprising young men for infringing on their patent, at least partially because these young men's quick thinking and brilliant problem solving, last I read, had saved at least 10 people's lives. Now, if humans are able to improvise and bring good out of a bad situation like that, just imagine what God can do. God, in the words of Isaiah 46, verse 10, knows the end from the beginning. He knows how everything is going to play out before it even starts. And consequently, he can provide blessing and salvation and have grace standing by ready to help us in our time of need. Even more, as believers in Jesus, we believe that there is no circumstance from which God cannot bring good. As believers in Jesus, we believe that the most horrific injustice this world has ever seen, the rejection and the torture and the crucifixion of God's perfect Son, even that in God's hands can become the greatest victory and greatest blessing the world has ever known, the salvation of humanity. So it's not unrealistic to imagine God making good out of the medical and emotional and economic difficulty that so many across our world are experiencing right now. It's not unrealistic, and in fact, it's faithful to believe that God is, in the words of Romans 8, verse 28, actively working all of what we see in this world right now for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And until we see all the specific ways God is going to do that, would you join with me in praying for God's unseen work to go on in the midst of this pandemic? Would you join with me in praying for God to be at work in the lives of the medical caregivers who are out there risking their own health for everyone else's behalf right now? Would you join with me in praying for God to be at work in the lives of people who have been laid off from their jobs? Waiters and waitresses and hourly workers all across this globe have suddenly found their only source of income shut off. Will you join with me in praying that the God of provision will take care of them and that he will be glorified when he does so? Would you even pray about how you and I can be God's instruments of peace and assurance? Interesting thing about Romans 8, verse 28, the Greek word that Paul used when he wrote that letter to the church in Rome, the word that we translate as work, it's the same word we find in passages like Mark chapter 16, verse 20, and 2 Corinthians 6, verse 1. That word work very specifically means to be a coworker. It means to cooperate with someone while aiming toward the same goal. Yes, God works in and through all circumstances to bring good for those who love him. But there's an implication there that we're cooperating with him even as he does so. That we are working with God to turn all things for good. And so even as the world exercises social distancing and keeps some physical separation, let's you and me seek God's guidance on how we can be his co-workers in bringing light and life and hope and healing to a dark and worried world.
Well, let's talk about family matters for just a second. We need to be praying certainly for so many things. As Gabe has alluded to, many are losing their jobs. The restaurants are closing down their seating areas. Waitresses and waiters are losing their tips. And I'm concerned about local businesses, so I want you to be praying for them. And of course, we need to be praying for the elderly. We need to be praying for those who have compromised immune systems. And as we're praying, I want you to continue to pray for our ministries and for the church, really, truthfully, the world over. Because, ministry is continuing. And so I want to thank everyone that went out this week and helped with Second Harvest. And we had truly a great time. I want to thank everyone. I'm hearing great things about all the support and the kindness showed to Hope Central and to that ministry in making sure those families are supported and that they get food. I would be remiss if I didn't mention our recovery ministries because it's so needed and it's such a good thing. And yes, they're gathering in smaller crowds, but they're still meeting because they need that support. And maybe as a church family, you may not even realize it, but we have 4 meetings weekly here, 2 AA meetings and 2 ACOA meetings every week here. Now, some of you have asked, what are you doing about preschool? Well, preschool is following Knox County, and that was a tough decision as well. But do know that ministry is not stopping either because teachers are reading online to their kids. We're going to be filming some songs, some chapel songs, and watching Mr. Gabe do some hungry hippo type stuff. Yeah, whatever that is, as he laughs. But we'll be doing that. We'll also be doing some chapel messages for them online. So want our preschool to continue. Pray for our preschool. We want to also pray for our children's ministry, and real tickled, want to guide all of our youngsters to go check out the children's ministry Facebook page. I know Cindy's putting up songs and different things there, so check that out. Bible class online, been asked about that. We are thinking about that. There is some research going into that, and so it's in the talking stages, and maybe we can do something interactive online, Zoom format, if you're familiar with that. Our prayer list. I'm going to continue just to pray for so many. I would say check your bulletin. You can even go back in the website and look at the old bulletin, but we're going to put that on the private Facebook page and continue to update that. And of course, just be looking at Facebook, be going to our website for so many things that are going to be changing in the coming weeks. A few folks have asked about giving. So I just want to go ahead and say we want to encourage you to give online. I know some of you automatically give through your bank, and that check's cut every month or every couple of weeks, but you can give online. But honestly, you can just mail a check. You can even drop it by. I know a few of you just bring a check by the church. So that's great, and we want to encourage you to continue to do that. But I guess as we close today, I just want you to feel free and know that you're supported and that we love you. And if there's anything that we can do as a church staff or as a community, please give us a call. Any way we can help you, reach out to us. And I guess I need to say it this way. We look forward to seeing you back next week, same format. So God bless and stay healthy. Go with God.